Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor here at Cinema Blend, and we have a new Disney Plus Marvel show, which means we're doing a full episode breakdown of Hawkeye. Now, Marvel dropped the first 2 episodes of the series on Disney Plus. It's introducing the new character Kate Bishop, who's played by Haley Steinfeld, and of course bringing back everyone's favorite curmudgeon of an Avenger, Clint Barton, played by Jeremy Renner, and how these two team up. I'm going to do a full-on breakdown of the first 2 episodes, getting into spoilers and sort of explaining who and what everybody is going into this show. So don't go any further if you haven't seen the episodes yet. Go over to Disney Plus, go watch them right now, and if you have seen them, let's dive into everything that we have been shown. Of course, before you get into the video, make sure you go down and hit subscribe, turn on your notifications. We're going to be tracking Hawkeye all the way through its 6-episode run, and we want to make sure that you guys see every single breakdown video that we do.
That's wonderful. Yeah, open the door, please.
So let's start with a guy whose name is the title of the show, and that is Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. So let's talk about some of the things that we've learned about Hawkeye as we go into this show. He's dealing with some PTSD, and we kind of see the first signs of this during that Rogers the Musical, which is a really cute and clever way to sort of show how the Avengers are having their impact on New York City and on pop culture. Of course, the Battle of New York would have its own little Broadway song and dance, but once Clint sees Natasha on stage, he flashes back to all the things that they've been through together and him being present at her death. So I kind of like the fact that in this sort of lighthearted, frothy moment, they do go remind you that Clint has been through a lot of stuff and he's not necessarily processed all of it and is still sort of dealing with the repercussions of losing his closest friend on the team. I also like the fact that Clint now has this hearing aid, and we had to wait till episode 2 before they revealed what the cause of the hearing aid is. And really, it's self-explanatory. Like, in a way, we're reminded that Clint Barton is one of the human elements of the Avengers. He doesn't have superpowers. His skill is really just archery and kind of being a detective sort of person, as we saw him go back into Kate Bishop's burned apartment in episode 2 and really just mimic being a fireman so that he can infiltrate the scene and even get the costume back. I love these elements that they worked into the show that show just how vulnerable and human Clint Barton is at this point too, and the hearing aid was a really, really nice touch.
No, it's just so I can hear you. And to be clear, not because I want to, just because I need to.
Also the fact to remind us of how human Clint is. Post-battle, he's got to hit up a drugstore to get medication, and he's got to teach Kate Bishop how to stitch up a wound, and you realize that these are all the things that Clint has done over the years post-battle, because he doesn't have a super soldier serum that Captain America has. He's not a god like Thor, and he doesn't have a suit of armor that Tony Stark can wear. Also, the element that they really lean into, which I like about Hawkeye too, because Jeremy Renner was saying during the interview process while promoting this show that he really got to know the character once they introduced the family element of Hawkeye in Avengers Age of Ultron. Once you realize that this guy had a family unit back home, that made him more interesting to Renner as an actor to play. And so we do get shots of Linda Cardellini playing his wife back home. We know that Clint is in Manhattan to have a little Christmas getaway with his kids, and that gets interrupted when he bumps into Kate Bishop wearing the Ronin suit.
Come on!
But what I liked about this is that Jeremy Renner leans into the sort of mentor teacher role that we did get to see at the very beginning of Avengers Endgame, where he's teaching his oldest daughter how to shoot a bow and arrow, and that's before the family gets dusted away. It's a great element to Clint that we don't expect necessarily, that this grizzled sort of, not loner necessarily, because he has teamed with Black Widow over the time, but somebody who prefers to sort of be on their own, probably a little more comfortable in the Ronin suit than we anticipated, can also, drop his guard, teach someone like Kate Bishop all the things that he has learned over the years, something like how to throw a tail or how to properly dress a wound. And I think that that's an element of Clint Barton that we're going to see the Hawkeye show explore moving forward, because we're going to get to learn more about his partnership with Kate Bishop, which will take us to our next section where we talk about Kate Bishop.
Could you sign my bow? You're kind of my favorite Avenger.
So Kate Bishop has been a character who has been linked with Hawkeye several times over the years in the comic books, but this is the first time we're seeing her on screen in the MCU. I love that the opening scenes of this new Hawkeye television show are set in the Battle of New York. They said it was 2012, but we didn't necessarily know that Kate Bishop, when we first meet her as a little girl, was going to be a victim of the collateral damage that is happening during the Battle of New York. Very, very cool way for us to access her origin story in the MCU, and and it proves that this battle has really been a flashpoint for everything going on in the MCU. The Vulture, Michael Keaton's character from Spider-Man Homecoming, his origin story is also somewhat tied to the Battle of New York, because he's a scrap merchant who's trying to invest in becoming part of the cleanup crew, and he gets trumped by Tony Stark, and that sort of pushes him to steal alien tech, Chitauri tech, and build his own Vulture suit and basically become a scavenger at this point. Kate looks outside and she sees Hawkeye battling the aliens. He actually ends up saving her without realizing that he was even doing it. And as she sees him sort of plunging off of the building, she realizes, I need a bow and arrow. That's something I want to do going forward. Now, of course, raises the obvious question that what if she looked out of her damaged penthouse, and saw Thor or Black Widow? Like, would she want to mimic them and become the type of hero that they are?
I'm not gonna lie to you, Hawkeye's a bit of a letdown.
Sorry to disappoint you.
But from that point on, Clint Barton has become Kate Bishop's favorite Avenger, and by the time the two of them cross paths, it really is sort of like not quite a groupie, meeting their favorite rock star, but Kate absolutely thinks that Jeremy Renner is tops on the Avengers, and somebody who she's been modeling her skill set for a very long time.
Totally cool. Just stay cool. The Hawkeye.
Another aspect of Kate Bishop that I find really interesting is that she comes from money. And we don't see this in the MCU all that often. We're used to, the Steve Rogerses of the world, the Peter Parkers of the world, people who are struggling. So when you mention someone who comes from money, of course you automatically have a link to Tony Stark. You think about someone who is as rich as he is, and who sort of maybe uses the element of their wealth to better their skills or to help the less fortunate, essentially. And Kate Bishop is trying to do that, even though she's been to private schools and she gets herself thrown out of them because she's practicing her archery. I wanted to sort of figure out how the show is going to move forward, talking about Kate's wealth and her background and the money that she comes from, and how it is the motivation, not just for her, but for the characters around her. Because as you see, when we're going to get to explore her mom and some of the things that come from her connection to Kate's money, and we have to see how they sort of play out.
Please, let's not. Okay, we've had enough drama this week.
I thought the first two episodes of the show did a really great job of explaining Kate's skill set, too. The way that she's sort of demonstrated them. We hear that she's studied karate forever, so when she's able to take on the Tracksuit Mafia following the auction, it's not too out of the ordinary that she can hold her own. Obviously, archery is a big thing for her. We see all of the trophies that she's earned. And then later on, we're going to talk about this when we get to Jack Duquesne, her ability with a sword. So Kate is really versatile, can absolutely hold her own in battle, and I think is an excellent pair for Hawkeye, who, when the two of them are sort of working their archery together, or Kate can use some of her other skills that she's brought on, it's going to make her a really formidable person to maybe take on a team like maybe the Young Avengers, which was a team that Kate was part of in the comics, and so I would not be surprised to see them show up in the MCU in some way, shape, or form.
Hell yeah.
All right, let's get into Eleanor Bishop, who I consider to be one of the most mysterious characters on the show. And right off the bat, listen, I don't trust her. I don't trust her one little bit. Primarily because you don't hire Vera Farmiga to play a character unless she's going to have some meat, some substance to her. And there are multiple times in these first two episodes where we see Eleanor Bishop sort of arguing with and possibly manipulating the men in her life, from Kate's original father. And in this one, you almost have to go back to episode number 1 to pay attention to the opening scenes, because you're kind of pay attention to Kate and who she's spying on her parents. But if you go back and listen to the conversation that they're having, Eleanor is almost chastising Kate's original father for growing up rich, and talking about the fact that, like, he might have to sell the penthouse because of the money problems that they're in. So it's a big issue for her. And then there's later on in the episode when they are at the party that Eleanor is throwing, and Kate is once again sort of spying on her mother and listening to the conversation she's having. This time Eleanor's talking to Armand. Armand being a character who we meet briefly in episode 1, and then he dies later, as you guys know.
Things are about to get very ugly.
And the things that Armand is saying to Eleanor is again sort of showing that she's a little bit of a power broker. Armand's saying to her, don't try that on me. And then he even goes so far as to say, I've got powerful friends too. So Kate kind of questions Eleanor on it and says, like, was that guy trying to overpower you? And Eleanor's like, I honestly don't know what she's talking about, but she's lying. She's totally lying. And the thing is, we're only 2 episodes into a 6-episode stint, so I don't really know if Eleanor is a bait and switch, if there's more going on with her than we're led to believe, or is she going to be part of the problem that Kate and Clint are going to be facing down later on? Because it would be great if, you know, Kate has to deal with the fact that her mother is evil or bad, and potentially manipulating her. And I, you know, just because we've watched so many of these MCU shows, I kind of think that Eleanor Bishop might be the bigger problem going on here. I think that there's a lot more going on at her place of employment or her business that she owns, Bishop Security, than we are privy to at the moment.
That's not a convincing argument. That's not an argument at all.
All right, so we can't talk about Eleanor without mentioning Jack Duquesne, who is her new fiancé. And we learn that they're going to get married. Kate sort of has that sprung on her. And we have to believe that he is set up to be a sinister character. But at the moment, right now, as of episode 2, I'm saying that maybe he's not quite as evil as the show is setting him out to be.
An unexpected surprise.
All surprises are unexpected.
Now, let's talk about Jack Duquesne in the comics, because he is a character who has been part of the Marvel Comics before. And in the Marvel Comics, he plays a character named Swordsman. He's one of many people who have been the Swordsman over the years, but I believe that he's one of the first ones, if not the very first one. And he showed up in an Avengers book and was a villain at first, but has eventually became one of those characters who has a real sort of gray side to him. Sometimes he's a freedom fighter, sometimes he's a straight up villain. And here's a really interesting part of it. At one point, the Swordsman, Jack Duquesne, was a mentor to Clint Barton, actually trained young Clint Barton and brought him up on some of his skills. So, you know, the MCU shows pull what they like to pull from the Marvel Comics, and it's very possible that there could be a cool link between Clint Barton from the MCU and Jack Duquesne when they meet. They haven't yet crossed paths in this show yet, and I would love it if when they do cross paths, if they've had some history, because that would make Jack a little bit more of an interesting character than as he's being portrayed right now.
You're almost too good to be true.
The Swordsman name also explains this weird fascination that Jack has with swords throughout the course of the first 2 episodes. So if you were watching it and you were kind of like, I don't understand why this guy's necessarily, like, he takes down all the paintings from Eleanor's apartment and makes her hang these classic swords. He is bidding far more money than he has to win the Ronin sword in the auction.
No, but I'll inherit it one day, won't I?
There's a reason for all of this. I mean, it hints at his past from the Marvel Comics, but it also, they go through that entire sequence, which I thought was a little bit too lengthy, of Kate and Jack sort of having their fencing play over the course of the dinner. Episode 2 had a lot of fat on it, and it went to some really weird places that I don't think it necessarily needed to, unless they pay off later. But one of those was trying to establish how good Jack is with a sword, and the fact that he was sort of hiding that skill set that he had, and that Kate almost had to sort of call him out on it through a fencing duel. That was a little bit odd.
To be fair, I did downplay my skill and repeatedly lie about it.
But the big question about Jack Duquesne is, did he really kill Armand? So Armand gets killed in episode 1. Kate encounters his body dead in his apartment, and he's died from multiple stabbing wounds, which of course would imply the sword. And you know, the clue, the tip off to her is the butterscotch candy, which she saw in Armand's apartment, and they made a you know, very obvious thing to sort of show that she saw them in there. And then of course later Jack has to offer her the exact same kind of candy, so Kate has to say like, oh my god, I think you've done it, and she sort of scurries off. Now, even for an MCU show, like, that's too obvious to me. And so I don't think that, I'm saying on record after 2 episodes, I don't think Jack is responsible for Armand's death. If anything, he was potentially killed by maybe someone that Eleanor controls, maybe the Tracksuit Mafia, who we're going to discuss next. But I think he was maybe set up that way to sort of frame Jack, cause, you know, again, the butterscotch candy was a little bit too obvious for the way they set it up, and I don't think that Jack is as evil as the show is making him out to be.
I'm an open book. Right, Dolly?
Okay, so in the last segment, I talked about the Tracksuit Mafia, and you were probably like, who are those guys? I don't really understand what's going on.
Why are you making it so tough on us, bro?
So, Pizza Dog and the Tracksuit Mafia are references to a limited series Hawkeye Marvel Comics run by a guy named Matt Fraction, who is one of the better contributors to Marvel Comics at this moment and even back then. And he did this incredible, again, sort of short Hawkeye story that involved Kate Bishop and was set in New York City and didn't really have major stakes. It was really just Clint Barton wanted to sort of get off the radar for a little while, found an apartment in New York City, and then the apartment building and all of the residents in it were being threatened by these Russian gangsters who went by the nickname the Tracksuit Mafia, and they would say bro a ton, and they basically were just sort of squeezing money. It was like a real estate scam. They were squeezing money out of the people in this apartment, but they didn't realize that Hawkeye was a resident in the apartment too, and all he wanted to do was be left alone. But he would, of course, interfere and help out the people in the apartment building and take on the Tracksuit Mafia. Well, one of the characters introduced in that series by Matt Fraction was Pizza Dog, and he was just a stray who Clint kind of bonded with. And I love the fact that the MCU Hawkeye show involves Pizza Dog. And there's a reason why there's a pizza shop below the apartment where Kate Bishop is set up. And there's a reason why these Tracksuit Mafia guys speak that way with their weird Russian accents and the fact that they say bro a ton.
What's up, bro?
But it does seem like the Hawkeye TV show is going to do a little bit more with them, because when they abduct Clint at the end of episode 2 and set him up, they're clearly working for someone else. They're not just some random Russian mafia group who is manipulating an apartment building. Instead, they have a larger role in the show, and they have someone else who's backing them. And that is the lady that we meet at the very end of their episode. And we're going to get to her in our final segment.
Sir, I'm going to need you to speed up, please.
I totally understand why you got to the end of episode 2 of Hawkeye and said, who the heck is that lady? Because it doesn't do much beyond show her turning around and then cuts to black, and we have to figure out who that is. Now, I'm here to tell you who that is. Her character is named Echo. The reason why we know she's important, I kid you not, is that Marvel has already announced that she's getting a spin-off series on Disney Plus later on. So if you have screen time in a Marvel movie or Marvel television show, there's a very good chance you're going to get a spin-off show later on down the road. But Echo is actually very important, and I think it's going to be integral to the story that they're telling in Hawkeye moving forward. She is a deaf, superpowered being. Now, sometimes superhero, sometimes supervillain. I love that the Hawkeye characters are a lot of people who exist in the gray area, whether it be Jack Duquesne or, of course, Echo, who we just meet at the end of episode 2. Echo is the adopted daughter of Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin of crime. And the Kingpin has been played by Vincent D'Onofrio in the Netflix Daredevil shows and is terrific in the part. Almost to the point where if they were going to do Kingpin in the MCU, like, you wouldn't want to cast anybody but Vincent D'Onofrio. He would be terrific to come back, and I know he wants to play him. So there have been rumors, unconfirmed, that Vincent D'Onofrio is going to show up in this Hawkeye series later on, that I think he comes by for episodes like 4, 5, and 6, which makes sense because everything's set in New York City. Kingpin is a huge character for New York City, and he's a member of the leader of the criminal underworld. So if you're introducing his adopted daughter in Echo, and part of the reason why we know that this is Echo, or, well, first off, I think Marvel has said it in its press releases, but the way that the show tells us this is she's got her hand on the vibrating amplifier, and she's very clearly reading the lips of the Tracksuit Mafia leader who's coming in and saying, like, we have abducted both Clint and Kate Bishop. So they're in the clutches of the Tracksuit Mafia when we leave them off, and the Tracksuit Mafia is being manipulated by Echo. In addition to the rumors that Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin might be coming back for Hawkeye, we're also hearing that Charlie Cox, who played Daredevil in that Netflix series and took on Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin, there are a lot of rumors that he's coming back to the MCU as well too. He's potentially supposed to show up in Spider-Man No Way Home. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not. He's not shown up in any of the marketing. But people have also said that his contract that he's signing for the new Marvel for involvement in the ongoing MCU is that he will show up in the Echo spin-off television series, that he will show up in She-Hulk, which a little bit makes sense because Jennifer Walters, who is the She-Hulk character, is an attorney, and so is Matt Murdock, who's Charlie Cox's alternate identity, and that they're also developing a Daredevil show for Disney Plus, and all of this could spring from the Hawkeye show.
My God.
I wasn't kidding when I told you that there's a lot of stuff that happened in the first 2 episodes of this very first season of Hawkeye, including the introduction of all of these integral characters and questions about the motivations of where everybody else is going. Now, in between all of this, it doesn't mean that everything worked. There were some really odd segments throughout the course of the first 2 episodes, including that LARPing session that took forever for Hawkeye to get the Ronin suit back, and again, that really weird sort of fencing aside between Kate and Jack at the dinner party in episode 2. I think the show's going to find its stride as we move forward, but right now it's been a lot to process, and I do hope that this breakdown helped clarify some of it for you guys.
I was just trying to help, okay?
Don't talk.
So needless to say, there is a lot of material going on in the first 2 episodes of Hawkeye, and we only have 4 episodes left to go for them to squeeze all of this story into. So make sure you meet me back here for our analysis of episode 3 as we continue to work our way all the way through Hawkeye. Keep it here on Cinema Blend for all of the best coverage of Marvel, both on the film side and the TV side. And if you're here on our YouTube channel, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on your notifications so the minute that one of our episode breakdowns hit, you guys can come on over here and watch it.